Well, welcome back to GP Outdoors. We're day 2 of hunting for hardwood. But before we head out into the forest, we've got a couple of things to take care of. I mentioned to you folks a few times that you've got to keep an eye on your driveway, especially subscribers that have told me they're just new or have just bought property. Take a look right up high in the middle of the driveway here. That cedar was not leaning across and hung up on that maple about 2 days ago when I came back down the driveway. But it's something I need to consider taking care of before the winter hits. As I mentioned before, you guys know I've been down this driveway a few times over the last month, cleaning debris off of the driveway and the shoulders as well as the leaves. And here we are again at the top of the steep hill. We've got another one on the right. She's starting to hang into the driveway. And as you get used to your driveways and your property, you start to see things change very subtly, especially in the shoulder seasons when you've got big windstorms or rainstorms. Before we head back into the forest, I'm going to head down to a neighbor's property. I promised to do a quick favor for them. Kind of a nice thing about having a tractor, it's not a big job today. All I've got to do is grapple up some limbs and take them into the back of their property. But for these good, kind people, this is an hour and a half of work. For me, it's a 5-minute job with the grapple. You'll see if you're new and you've just got a grapple recently, I made one fatal error here. As I pushed into the pile, I lifted that grapple up a little early, and you'll see here I've missed 3 big limbs. So although I've caught the branches at the end of those limbs, I know from experience that given the distance I have to go back into their property, those limbs are most likely not going to make it. They're going to fall out of the grapple. So what I'll do is I'll try to find a reasonably flat or open area on my way back, and I'm simply going to drop the load and reposition it. I drop the grapple down, I release the load. As you'll see, I'm going to back the tractor up, and then you'll see I'm going to drop the grapple further or closer to the ground so I can get those bottom tines underneath those larger limbs. I curl forward, and then I grip and compress again. After I lift it, I take a quick look to the right, and I know I've got a good grip on those limbs now, and I'm going to be safe to travel with that load into the back of their property without, or at least minimal risk of losing any of those branches along the way. Right here, I had to lift the load high, but you'll notice I immediately drop it back down because you don't want to be traveling over uneven terrain with a load high up above the tractor. But I lifted to get over those obstacles, and now that I'm into the clearing, I'm going to drop this brush back where Husky Bobby asked me if I could do it. Like I said, pretty simple job on the way back to Guy's place. We drop our load, and then we head off back down the concession. but not before making one more stop before we head back into the forest. You probably noticed Husky Bob always has that trailer on the back of his ATV and usually has at least one chainsaw strapped to the racks on the front. Bobby has a keen eye for limb wood or any good firewood. He does a lot of trail maintenance and property maintenance, and he always is on the lookout for a little bit of firewood here and there, which is often left behind by people like myself. I'll look at some small limbs or small branches and think, it's not worth the hassle. Good old Husky Bob, well, he'll pull off that chainsaw, he'll buck them up, throw them into the back of the trailer, and haul them back into Guy's woodshed. There's probably about a third of a trailer here, but that'll give Guy a couple of days of heat. So every little bit counts, and that's the one thing I've learned about Guy. It doesn't matter how pretty or how big that wood is. Every little bit counts across the season, and if you can get a day here and a couple of days there of heat, it all adds up. Now it's time to head back into the forest and continue on the hunt for hardwood. I've learned a lot about safety over the years with Husky Bob and Guy out in the forest, and one thing is visual indication or visual communication. They've taught me a long time ago you can't really hear voices much over the sounds of splitters and chainsaws and tractors. So you tend to keep an eye on your peers or your buddies around in the forest. You take a look at it, for example, grappling these large logs onto the splitter. Watch Guy. Guy's got his hand up, he holds it to tell me to slow down. He follows it through, he's going to tell me if I can drop it or what to do next. Spreads his fingers to tell me it's okay to open the grapple, and then he points to tell me it's okay to now back up. So I virtually don't do anything without seeing a visual cue from one of them before I do it. It helps to keep everybody safe in the forest as we work. You probably also noticed there's a bit of a pattern to this hunt for hardwood here down in the late November time frame. When we're often through different parts of the forest throughout the preceding months doing firewood, we found over time that it's a much more efficient and effective to manage wood of reasonably same diameter. In other words, if you've got a lot of 10 or 12 or 14 inch wood and then you've got some big stuff that's 22, 24 inches, you tend to focus on one or the other at a time, because it takes different types of equipment to process, 24 inch diameter wood versus 10 inch diameter wood. So today you'll notice, and yesterday or on the last video, you'll notice that we're primarily processing big diameter stuff. So when we go back into the forest, that's what we're doing. We bring the equipment required for that. And back in the day, we had one splitter. It was kind of a conventional splitter, for lack of better words, but it also allowed you to split vertically. And back then, you get rounds this big, and we were rolling them along the ground. We'd have to get down on all fours, on our knees and hands, and split them vertically one at a time. It's much easier to bring the right equipment in and do all of that big stuff at once than to try to mix it in while you're doing the smaller stuff at the same time. Or at least that's what we found. And although on day one of our hunt, you'll remember I noticed that we brought the 4-way split, certainly surprised that the Eastonmade ULTRA could split through that big stuff with the 4-way. It's much easier, in my opinion or my experience, and much more manageable to use a single wedge when you're trying to split this big diameter stuff. As you can see here, Guy and Husky Bob are starting to get a little fancy, probably for the camera, and they're doubling up their splits, because you can with the Eastonmade. That single wedge is pretty high, and we've got it right now up at its highest position. But certainly makes splitting those quarters much more efficient. And here's where, Guy and Husky Bob are getting a little lazy. Usually in the past, back before we had the Grapple, we would move the trailers and the splitter 50 or 60 feet or yards down the trail to pick up some of this other stuff. But because I've got the Grapple and they're continuing to split, It's just much more efficient for me to back the tractor down the trail a ways and pick up those splits and bring them to the splitter. For those folks that are new with a grapple, kind of an important note here. You'll see that I've got some blocked rounds that are sitting adjacent to an unblocked log. I curl my grapple forward and I use the front jaw to pull that first log out of the way a few inches. But you'll notice that in the channel I never use the front jaws of a grapple to pull any type of a intransigent or rooted object. In other words, I would never use the front jaw of the grapple to try to rip a stump out of the ground or a rock out of the ground. That's not what they're designed for. But when you've got an object that's loose on the ground, certainly totally okay to use the force of the grapple or the front jaw of the grapple to move it as needed. Another important point, if you do have a grapple in your tractor and you're new to using it, as you know, I was probably the first guy on YouTube to ever buck logs off the grapple of my tractor, because I was one of the first guys to get a grapple and to use this method. It's nice to be able to get that log off the ground, but this is probably about a 30 to 35 foot log, which far exceeds, of course, the width of my tractor. And when you're picking up that log, you'll probably notice I'm not grabbing the log right in the middle physically. I'm trying to estimate, given the fact that the butt end of the log is going to be a larger and heavier diameter than the top of the log, so I tend to grab the log around the 60-70% down towards the butt, because I'm trying to balance the weight on either side of the loader arms. It's very important to make sure that you try to balance that weight. Same time that day. Oh, there we go.
7.
Yeah, later that same day, after lunch. There we go. Oh, come on, it wants to. There we go. You'll notice when Husky Bob is bucking the rounds, he's going from one side of the grapple or the tractor to the other because he's trying to maintain a reasonably equal balance that exists outside those loader arms, because you're creating or imposing a lateral force against those loader arms when you've got an uneven load hanging feet or possibly 10 or 20 feet outside the grapple. I only lifted it off the ground enough to allow Bobby a more comfortable stance, but at the same time I try to balance the load on either side because I'm not actually going to travel with that log. I just want to get it up off the ground. Here's a great shot right here. You're going to see it looks like my loader arms or my grapple is twisted or tilted down to the left or the bottom left of your screen. If you look closely, the whole tractor is tilted. I knew approaching that log that I was falling into a divot on the right side of the tractor and the entire tractor was dipping down, and it's part of the consideration I took into account before I determined where I was going to grab that log before I lifted it. And hey, if you grab it first and you lift it and it's not right and you see that you're terribly unbalanced, just put your load down, release the load, reposition your tractor and try again until you get something that you think is reasonably balanced across the loader arms.
That's gotta be one of the fastest loads.
Yeah, you're getting faster every day.
I tell you what.
Well, that'll finish us up for day 2 of the hunt for hardwood. Looks like we got some big game to catch tomorrow. Thanks for sticking around. I hope you enjoyed it today. If you like the channel, please click subscribe, hit the like button, and if you want to know when I'm posting videos, just click that little bell. Have a wonderful week with your families. Please be kind to one another. I'll see you again right here on GP Outdoors. Cheers.